Welcome back, everyone. In this episode of my prog rock show, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite progressive rock albums. You want to guess what it is? No? Todd Rundgren's Utopia. Todd was born to Harry and Ruth Rundgren on June 22, 1948 in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. With an early interest in music and recording, Todd would find himself in Woody's Truck Stop, a successful Philadelphia-based blues cover band. With an ambition to record, he would leave Woody's Truck Stop to form the Nazz in 1967. The Nazz would release 3 albums which allowed Todd to hone his producing skills in the studio. Todd would leave the Nazz before their 3rd and final album with the notion of giving up music altogether. As fate would have it, Todd would find himself as a producer at Bearsville Studios in Woodstock, New York. In the midst of producing bands like The Band and The Sparks, Todd recorded 2 solo albums, 1970's Runt and 1971's The Ballad of Todd Rundgren. After finishing Bad Fingers Straight Up, in which producer credits begrudgingly went to George Harrison, who abandoned the project, Todd would complete his 3rd album, Something Anything. 3 singles were released from the album, including I Saw the Light and Todd's most identifiable song, Hello It's Me. So what steered Todd Rundgren into prog? 1, he was being compared to Carole King. Secondly, he was being pigeonholed as a singer-songwriter. Neither Todd cared for, and his sound would drastically change. With the aid of psychedelics, Todd would put music to his hallucinations, which surfaced in his 4th solo album, A Wizard, a True Star, which would be released in 1973. Todd's follow-up, simply titled Todd, was another exploration into his mind-expanding hallucinations with a mix of prog, psychedelia, and the pop sound that put him on the map. Just for the record, I am in no way promoting the use of psychedelics or any other recreational drug for that matter. This experimental sound was his first foray into progressive rock. In the song Les Filles Internationales on A Wizard, a True Star, Todd did a little foreshadowing with the line, "Wait another year, Utopia is here." He would name his touring band Utopia, consisting of Hunt and Tony Sales, sons of Soupy Sales. Now keep in mind, this is not the Utopia this video is about, at least not yet, as this was the version known as Utopia Mark I, consisting of matching spacesuits, each member sporting different colored hair, and an elaborate stage production that hemorrhaged money. Although the promotional tour for A Wizard, a True Star with Utopia Mark I didn't take off as planned, Todd entered the studio once again to produce the debut of the New York Dolls and Grand Funk Railroad's chart-topping We're an American Band. Todd would also produce Hall & Oates' War Babies album released in November of 1974. Thank God my mother-in-law is not here to tell me about her John Oates story again.
John Oates kissed me right here on the cheek.
A new version of Utopia would tour at the end of 1973. With the Todd album released in February of 1974, it was time to focus on Utopia. Todd claimed that prog rock was the flavor of the month and we were all itching to play some. So who are the members of Utopia? Aside from Todd Rundgren on guitars and lead vocals, the band consisted of John Siegler on bass, Kevin Elman on drums, Mookie Klingman and Ralph Schuckett on keyboards, and Jean-Yves Labatt, aka M. Frog, on synthesizers. Todd's idea for Utopia would be in a similar vein to the English progressive rock bands of the time, with less structure and more freeform. In the midst of all the projects Todd was working on in 1974, he began recording songs for Utopia's debut album. The recording sessions would take place at Secret Sound Studio in New York City in a leisurely fashion. Utopia was initially leaning more towards a jazz rock sound, drawing influence from the likes of Mahavishnu Orchestra and Frank Zappa. Their sound would ultimately become more progressive as they worked things out. Rundgren was deemed as a benevolent dictator, not exactly running a democracy, but encouraging input from the other musicians with all hands on deck. Anyone was free to propose a song idea to be incorporated into the album. Utopia's debut only consisted of 4 songs, but don't be fooled. This album was full of music, so let's take a close look at each track. Utopia Theme is the 14.5-minute album opener that was actually recorded live in November of 1973. It was written by Rundgren and Dave Mason and really shows off not only the complexity of their compositions, but the talent and tightness of the band in a live setting. Utopia Theme is followed by the 10-minute song Freak Parade. This more or less reveals the odd side of the band. Freak Parade featured weird offbeat musical breaks that fit with the overall theme of getting people off the sidewalk to join their Freak Parade. It is ambitious and everything about the song works. Track 3 featured more of a straight-ahead rock anthem called Freedom Fighters. It is definitely the most accessible song on the album and clocks in at a mere 4 minutes, which is very short relative to the length of the tracks on the rest of the album. This was a sort of blueprint for what Utopia would record in the late 70s. The real showcase was the last and longest song on the record. The all-hands-on-deck writing approach would lead to the 30-minute epic The Icon. The challenge that came along with this approach was making all the pieces fit in the right order. Todd would write the lyrics for the composition, conceptualizing the song as a utopian community. Apparently, there were 30 to 40 minutes of music that was left on the cutting room floor, so the icon was heavily edited. When played live, it was extended to an hour and a half after all the musicians got to solo. Because of this, Utopia shows could last up to 5 hours. The final product would have 1 hour's worth of music fit onto one single record. Rundgren's next solo album, Initiation, pushed it to a whopping 67 minutes, which degrades the sound quality considerably. He chalked it up to just being rock and roll, and when CDs came out, he filled them up too. The album would be released as Todd Rundgren's Utopia on November 9, 1974. Todd claimed initially, "We put my name above it for obvious commercial reasons." Todd did put the band together, and to garner attention, it made sense to feature his name. The album was a bit divisive with its very dense prog sound. It intimidated Rundgren's pop fans, but it was praised by Rush's Neil Peart and David Bowie. Soon after its release, Utopia saw the departure of its first member, Jean-Yves Labatte, being replaced by Roger Powell, who would stick with the band for a long duration. Kevin Elman would also leave, with John Willie Wilcox taking over drum duties. In August 1975, Utopia would record their second album live, titled Another Live, featuring compositions from Leonard Bernstein and Jeff Lynne's Dooya, as well as original material. The Seven Rays is a real standout and continues what Utopia had started on their debut. Another Live would be released on November 15th of 1975. Again, members would depart. This time Moogie Klingman and Ralph Schuckett, leaving Utopia as a four-piece. The next studio project was a tongue-in-cheek disco album called Disco Jets. It would go unreleased until the track showed up in a Japanese compilation series in 2001, and finally as a proper album in 2012 by Esoteric Recording. To me, this was the perfect amalgamation of disco and prog, and it was a very fun listening experience. Soon, bassist John Siegler would leave, being replaced by Chasm Sultan, completing Utopia's most stable lineup and most democratic. The Raw album would be recorded in 1976 and released in early 1977, capping off Utopia's progressive rock run, as both Rundgren's solo work and collaboration with Utopia would become more accessible once again. Ultimately, Todd would return to his pop roots in the late 70s, and Utopia would delve more into pop rock and ultimately new wave. Todd, however, would keep his solo project separate from the band effort of Utopia. Todd stated, "My own albums tended to be more about songs and songwriting, and not as much about musical flourishes or lots of wild guitar." This is where my story ends, but there is one thing I learned about Todd Rundgren in the 70s. He could literally do no wrong, whether he was working on pop rock or prog. He even turned a 300-pound singer named Meatloaf into a superstar by producing Jim Steinman's Bat Out of Hell, if that tells you anything. Todd Rundgren's Utopia is probably one of my top 5 favorite albums. Now, I still do not rank albums, but if I did, it would look something like this. Number 5. And that concludes my top 5. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.